We are holding so many bodies, especially for KNH. They say many of them are children. We are holding so many bodies in our mortuary, and we have to dispose of them.
All right. Okay. So I think there are several reasons why bodies could become unclaimed. One, I think they could be I mean, this from my experience with even talking to families is first of all, essentially they could be fear, and also stigma, like someone's relative was found as, the suicide bomber in a case. So that family is like, we are embarrassed. We don't know how this happened. Are we to blame? So now you find that the family, is stigmatized by the issue. You find sometimes like the state itself is like, no, if we allow the family to bury a body, they might make, people might make a martyr out of this person.
Yeah.
I've been asked about why Osama bin Laden was buried at sea, Also, affordability. So people are like, the more the body stays in the morgue, we can't afford. We can't afford. And if the person now is found, like 3-4 months later, and now a family comes to know, and the family lives in Bungoma, and they have to travel to Nairobi, then now they're thinking about the transport costs. Now we have to also pay the mortuary costs, because now, since the identity is known, you have relatives, so someone has to pay this bill. So sometimes families might just say, then let the body be disposed of. And actually, maybe I should make that correction. I hear, that kind of word being saying, bodies being disposed. It's actually what we should say is bodies being respectfully disposed, undergoing respectful disposition, because also morgue congestion is a real thing. So what has happened even in other places in the world, like in Sudan, just before the conflict began in mid-April last year, there were like already 3,000 bodies in the mortuary. Families did not want those bodies to be buried because they wanted an investigation of those bodies. But those bodies were in a mortuary, that could not properly preserve those bodies. So the bodies were essentially commingling and sludging, because now human tissue is sludging on top of one another when they're not buried in body bags. I mean, when they're not kept in body bags, so there's no barrier between that and the next body. And then also then exposing it to scavenging. And then, looking at a potential health hazard. So a long-term burial can be short-term or long-term. The temperature underground is actually cooler. So if you collect all the preliminary data from a body, you do the investigation, the postmortem investigation, you can actually keep that body underground properly in what is called an organized mass grave. Those are terms that unfortunately we have had to develop as forensic practitioners globally, because in places like there's armed conflict, what do you do? Or there's like an earthquake, like let's say, hopefully that it never happens. But if anything happened in Kenya, like a sizable event, where we had even like 1,000 or 3,000 bodies, or even more, then what would we do? Would we allow people to just bury a body wherever they found it? Then how do we account for who that person is?
So sometimes these burials are actually some form of storage as well.
Actually, they're just meant to be storage, and they're not meant to prevent any traceability. They're supposed to enhance traceability. So you should know where you buried the body, what number it was tagged, who that body belongs to in terms of the case report on the post-mortem forensic human identification death investigation side.
Right.
And then you allow families. So like, for example, even something simple like clothing and personal effects that were found on the body. What I found in my experience is these are everything is just...
it's all lumped together.
It is not managed appropriately. So what should happen in the morgue is once the all clothing and personal effects should be properly examined. And sometimes you may even have to wash the clothing to examine it properly. So that kind of like even a laundry service in a mortuary is not available. So what happens now is you find that you can't even dry those clothes, you can't even take pictures of them, you can't even put them in a catalog, so that when families come and we say, okay, let's go through first personal effects. What do you know? What was the person wearing? Or, you know.
Yeah.
So I think all this, it plays a role into the lack of traceability. And so you have this unclaimed can be for various reasons. Even unidentified. But I would say, I mean, at this point is the other thing is I think we are very averse to research or paying money for research or the cost of corruption is the fact that we don't have research to inform policy. Is that when was the last research done on death management systems in the country? You know, and
when was the last time you heard of our universities focusing their attention on research?
I think
I'm talking about public
maybe I would be
universities.
also guilty. It's just you go through university and you're like, you just want to finish this thing, you know.
Very true.
You see, so I think that by the time you get to realize the value of research, you are so far gone in your career that now you're like, oh my gosh, now how do we do it? Someone has to fund it. You know, will someone actually be willing to fund it? And I think the problem with scientific fields, and I would say in this regard, forensic medicine, because this is the medicine of the postgraduate specialty that handles this work, is that it's not a priority. So I think this is a very African experience. What gets funded in Africa for science gets funded by institutions outside of the African continent. And so they fund what is in their interest, in their agenda. So they set priorities for research. So public health is huge. Okay, but where is forensic medicine in the scale of all this? It involves dead, missing, injured persons.
No money.
And yet the countries we speak of, part of the reason why they are where they are is because they focus on research. A lot of what they've done, the heights they have reached, whether it's in industry or commerce, research has been at the forefront. Whether it's medicine,
Yeah.
whether it's you think of any discipline,
It's true.
their focus and emphasis on research is one of the elements that help propel them to exactly where they are. And yet we who need it the most don't seem to understand that it's something that we ought to give attention to.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the tragedy of it. So if you look at even where I used to work, which was Ministry of Health, the focus was malaria, TB, HIV. So this government of this pathologist office, what do you people do anyway? You understand? In fact, I remember a previous DMS telling me one day, Dr. Even Jesus said, leave the dead to the dead.
Wow.
You know. So I was like, okay, so the dead are not a cohort. So what are we doing in this ministry? But then you also can't be in interior, because this is the reason why police pathologists were no longer made a thing in Kenya, was because they couldn't be impartial on the process of death investigation. And so the issue around forensic medicine, forensic science, it requires, science brings objectivity to the table and objectivity to the investigation. So that's why a forensic service, whether we like it or not, must be an independent service.
Okay. Is this what the National Coroners Act was doing?
Well, the National Coroners Act is, like I said, trying to consolidate legislation on deaths. The National Coroners Service Act cannot replace the need for a Forensic Services and Regulatory Act, which Kenya does not have. So there's so much about forensics. Like, for example, traffic medicine. How do you know someone is fit to drive beyond a certain age? You understand what I'm
There's
saying?
something called traffic medicine.
Yes, traffic medicine is forensic medicine. When a plane goes down, how do you identify the people, for example, who died in the plane crash in Ethiopia a few years ago? Majority of them were Kenyans. But what was the forensic human identification response? I remember really pushing hard to have myself and another colleague be part of Interpol's team But when we came back, we were asked a very serious question and asked, are you people really supposed to be in this ministry?
What?
Yes. So I think I would say it's a lack of knowledge. And because we haven't, as a country, had the forensic conversation, we haven't opened the forensic conversation to become an inclusive conversation, we are really missing a lot of, for example, age assessment. How do you tell a child is 14? You know, how do you, when you say we have sent you for age assessment, what are you actually doing? You're actually asking for a scientific analysis of age. So we have not, when a migrant worker dies in Saudi Arabia, you know, what is the forensic medical response, death investigation response at our regional delegation in the Middle East?
Dr. Ari, I want to take you back to something you said. It triggered a thought in my mind. When you look at the focus we have as far as the various disciplines within medicine is concerned, is it really ignorance, or is it the aspects, the various disciplines that promise someone a bigger earning at the end of it? Let me explain to you why I'm asking the question. If you look at even when you studied that Department of Public Health, for many people who study the discipline that you're in, it wasn't taken too seriously.
No.
Yes, exactly, because it wasn't emphasized. But yet, a country like ours actually requires a very serious focus on that, because then we focus on preventative and promotive health, which we don't. We talk about it, okay? Now, if you're talking about the dead and you look at the taboos and the myths and misconceptions that we have around death, when you're a doctor who deals with the death, is it that what you have studied is not relevant, or they don't understand the relevance, or on the scale of what they think priorities ought to be? There was a time when professors and dons felt that women should not study anything postgraduate apart from pediatrics, and they would say so.
Yeah.
Those biases exist.
They do.
And why I'm saying you're right is that there's a misinformation, and that bias, is it really ignorance, or is it just blatant, what word can I use which is polite? Nothing comes to mind, so I'll
Just use the word.
I'll just leave it, yes.
Okay, well, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, there's a lot to be discussed. I think a lot of, first of all, forensic medicine is not something that you would see, you know, people saying go into forensic medicine. Because people are like, in fact, you know, for an intern to be told go do a postmortem, you know, first of all, is way outside their bracket. Because undergrad cannot teach you how to do should not, let me put it this way, teach you how to do a postmortem. That is the work of a pathologist who has done a master's in forensic medicine. So there's a lot that needs to be, for example, how many masters in forensic medicine do we have in the country?
How many?
Not many. There are very few. In contrast to the size of our population.
By very few, what do you mean? 100?
No. Pathologists, yes. Forensic pathologists, probably less than 10.
Less than 10.
Yeah, less than 10.
Okay.
Yeah. I want to say, I think that this issue of forensic medicine being not acknowledged, not valued, not acknowledged, not budgeted for within the governance framework is what has caused a lot of institutions to be to be crippled. Sorry. You cannot run a National Commission of Human Rights without understanding forensic medicine. Or forensic sciences or evidence management. You really need to be able to know that very well. You can have an investigation component, but the reality is you can't be, oblivious of the field. You can't do it in the, evidence management is critical for a strong criminal justice system. It's very important for anything. If you talk about sexual and gender-based violence, maritime, financial crimes, you talk about, drugs and crime, you talk about homicides, femicide. I mean, the list is endless. It's all forensic medicine. But that's why the problem is the law has been so fragmented because of lack of knowledge. And now because of turf wars, you can't... Globally, there's a forensic advisory board. There are forensic advisory boards. But Kenya, we don't even have a forensic advisory board, unfortunately. And
is there anything that you're doing, you and your fellow forensic scientists, a few of you that you are, to work, to talk in the corridors, to go into offices, go into forums and talk about this, create that awareness? Because of what I'm hearing from you is much of what we are saying is just lack of awareness and therefore lack of placing importance. When a director of medical services is asking you, so you just let mambo of death be death, this is just lack of awareness.
It is lack of awareness. I think for a long time it's been lack of awareness. I think now we have crossed a certain line where things could become very convenient for not having systems.
I see.
Yeah, and I think when the line between how perpetration of crimes is handled, how investigation of crimes is handled, how scientific analysis of evidence is handled, how adjudication of that evidence is handled in the courts. When the lines between those aspects starts becoming blurry, they can be blurry because of lack of knowledge. They could have been blurry because of lack of knowledge, ignorance, refusal to put money in the right places, corruption. But I think when now it starts to move to where it's now working conveniently to create missing persons, where now you have a problem. Now you have a problem. Because it means the government's governance framework is skewed or is deliberately dilute, to get away with crime. So I think that is huge. So I would say the unidentified person, unclaimed persons, biggest ethical issues is we are creating missing persons. And then we also have a big problem of if you misidentify one person, you've misidentified two people.
Yeah.
So you need to study this thing very well. It's like having, the red Skittles, and the green Skittles and the brown Skittles and the blue Skittles and the purple ones, and everything is just commingled. You actually need to do research to develop a proper forensic ecosystem to address crimes and human rights violations in a country. And I would say what we are doing, I talk about this as much of a chance I get, I talk about it. I would say the lack of knowledge has even been not just in terms of where I worked in terms of government or interagency action, but the lack of knowledge was also there because I would say I guess even if I was a PS or a minister, my diary does not include talking to Daktari who has an issue on, a cardiologist doctor wants to do a presentation to me or a forensic medicine person. But I think there must be a way to acknowledge all fields of medicine and the value that they bring. But I think the lack of knowledge has also been outside of government. And I think today now we find ourselves at a point where people inside of government and outside of government are also asking these very serious questions, and there must be answers to these questions.
In this field, must someone necessarily be a medical doctor to be able to participate in forensic science?
No. Forensic science is for scientists. And science makes doctors. So I think we need to, so forensic science is...
Natural science makes for doctors.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the field is wide, and I think the core is the science.
Okay. Dr. We thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you for this conversation. Dr. Marina Kalsi is a forensic specialist. She's been our guest for this hour, getting to understand what forensics is and the role that it plays. It's 10 a.m. Have a lovely day. We had said we are going to end with this song. Yeah. Gone. We're gone. Until when? Sitting?
Next year.
Oh, there's like a joke, I don't know.
Yes.
We are gone until November. Have a lovely day. It's 10 a.m.
Okay.